Before I can answer the question, we need to look at how we got this current incarnation of the Man of Steel. Chances are, you've heard people say, or even thought yourself, that Superman is too powerful. But in the early days of Superman, he was only strong enough to pick up a car. He couldn't fly, but leap 1/8 of a mile, and you can forget about the question of who is the fastest, Superman or the Flash, because Superman could only outrun an express train. These were his original powers in his first introduction in Action Comics in 1938, the golden age of comics. As the years progressed into the Silver Age, Superman's powers rapidly increased into godlike powers, also introducing us to other members of the Supes family like Supergirl and Krypto. We were also given the first live-action look at Superman with a TV series in 1948 starring Kirk Allen. 3 years later, our first Superman movie, Superman and the Mole Men, starring George Reeves. As the 70s hit, along came with it the Bronze Age. His power remained godlike, but his intellect also grew. He was an explorer, a philosopher, scientist, and occasionally even a pacifist. And at this time in history came the interpretation of Superman we all know and love. Superman the movie, starring the late Christopher Reeve, the movie that began the superhero movie genre. Christopher Reeve's Superman had it all: super strength, flight, invulnerability, wall-repairing vision, and super cellophane shields, as well as the infamous memory-erasing kiss. Okay, not all his powers were the best, but this incarnation of Superman is the one that sticks with most people today. He was the epitome of truth, justice, and the American way. He was a real Boy Scout. 1980 brought us arguably the best Superman film with Superman 2, followed by Drunk Superman in 1983. Unfortunately, that was the last time we saw Reeves as Superman. Trust me. The mid-90s brought us a new TV show with Lewis and Clark, The New Adventures of Superman, and then Tom Welling, sort of pulling on the cape with Smallville in the early late 2000s. 2006 brought Superman back to the big screen with Brandon Routh taking up the mantle as Kal-El with Superman Returns. An unfortunate false start at resetting the Superman universe. I for one feel this movie doesn't get the love it deserves. I could make a whole video on this one alone, maybe for another day. While it does tread familiar waters, there's something to behold by the love this movie has for Superman, and of course the plane catch scene, maybe my favourite Superman moment put to the big screen. And this brings us to 2013's Man of Steel. Why did I just rattle off the history of Superman? Because every incarnation before Man of Steel portrays Superman as the willing hero, a beacon of light for the vulnerable. He does struggle from time to time, but this is pushed to the forefront in Man of Steel. It delves deep into the man with conflict of whom he is, what he should actually do, if he should help anyone at all. While there's certain criticism in this take, it also makes sense to have a modern take on a character that was created in a time when people needed hope and optimism. Man of Steel was first conceived during the writing process of Christopher Nolan's The Dark Knight Rises. The writer, David Goyer, picked up some Superman comics while struggling with the third Batman script. Man of Steel ideas began to take form. He pitched Chris Nolan a reboot of Superman, but a Superman with conflict, struggling to understand his place in the world with his godlike powers. Chris loved the idea and pitched the idea to Warner Brothers, who immediately greenlit the project. Zack Snyder was brought on as director, and as they say, the rest is history. Say what you will about Snyder, but one thing his films don't lack is extraordinary visuals. One of the more prominent scenes that is relatable to everyone on Earth.
You just have to decide what kind of man you want to grow up to be, Clark.
This is a question that has persisted in our thoughts. When we were little, we all wanted to be just like our parents, or Superman. But what if being a superhero is trickier than it first appears to be? We can all agree that Superman is the king of all heroes. In Zack Snyder's Man of Steel, Superman's origin story was told beginning with the first breath, illuminating how Superman came to be. Although Superman battles General Zod to prevent the annihilation of Earth and humans, Man of Steel also depicts how Superman acquired his superhuman skills, his typical childhood, and his heroic but regular adulthood. The Superman legend is recounted from the very beginning, with condensed exposition about Krypton and the anticipated conclusion of baby Superman, also known as Clark Kent or Kal-El. Being sent to Earth and developing his superhuman abilities over the course of his early years, he gained the capacity for flight, strength, heat vision, speed, and many others. After Clark exposed himself by saving the children in the school bus, his father went outside to talk to him. He tells Clark,
Oh, Clark, you have to keep this side of yourself a secret.
What was I supposed to do? Just let him die?
Maybe.
this giving us a whole new look at Superman and how his early years reflected on how he sees the world as an adult. His father knows what the world may think about him, that they might try to do to him, and as his father, his first instinct is to protect his son no matter the cost. even if it means sacrificing his own life. We can tell that Clark has developed self-control through his clenching of the fence bars. He is able to contain his emotions without letting go of them, which prevents him from venting his rage on the boys and allowing his talents to be released. Being fully aware of his skills at this point in the movie gives the audience a sense of comfort, hope, and a desire for Clark to follow through on managing his emotions. This gives the audience a sense that Clark is a better human than humanity itself. As we observe him struggle through his development while being aware of his hidden powers on Earth, we simply grow more attached to his character and appreciate this. The more we learn about his secret abilities on Earth and observe him struggle as he grows, the more we can grow to care about him and appreciate his ability to suppress his emotions, which many human beings can lack, and wish to have the capacity to exercise self-restraint and control over angry emotion. It's difficult to imagine that Man of Steel was in theatres close to 10 years now, but as I see it again now, I'm struck by how ahead of its time this Superman movie was. Man of Steel is an absolute masterpiece, including amazing visuals, huge battles, and groundbreaking rethink of their character and his environment. For superhero movies, as we know them, 2012 marked a tipping point. Iron Man had already been established for 4 years at this point, but everything changed after Marvel's The Avengers came out. It's easy to argue that the debut of Marvel's first team-up movie raised the bar for any potential competition in the superhero genre, marking a huge accomplishment in the marketing and pop culture. It was obvious that whomever wished to take on Marvel's Titans would have to do so in a wholly original manner. Perhaps this explains why Zack Snyder's Man of Steel was hailed by so many comic book enthusiasts as a breath of new air for the heavily comedic superhero subgenre. The end result was a movie that honoured the reputability of the superhero and their fight for justice, without becoming weighed down by the standards set by Marvel Studios. It centered on a man who grew up only wanting to protect the world, but also demonstrated how sometimes that protection might be at conflict with what he believes in. However, the narrative didn't hesitate to explore the murky waters of what Superman may entail for all of humanity. The last son of Krypton was presented to us in both his most human and his most celestial forms. As we've already noted, one of Man of Steel's greatest triumphs was giving the DCU a distinctive tone that was very different, particularly anything Marvel had to offer. Snyder may be responsible for this, but I believe the presentation as a whole deserves a lot of the credit. However, Snyder's Man of Steel didn't hold back in some of the Superman's most iconic comic book moments. The visual style of the film contains some elements that remind us of some of Christopher Nolan's aesthetics in his Dark Knight trilogy. All of Nolan's Dark Knight films were quite realistic. After all, they were all set in Gotham that might as well have just been New York City. With Man of Steel, which greatly emphasises the sci-fi parts of Superman's abilities, that wasn't the case. This unabashed adoration of the superhero genre will eventually become the DCU's standard. If you want to make a comparison, just contrast Christian Bale's portrayal of Batman in The Dark Knight Rises with Ben Affleck's in Batman v Superman. Still, it's impressive to see how self-contained the story of Snyder's Man of Steel can be given to how much of a pathfinder it was for the DCU. This is a movie that could easily stand alone without anyone noticing. In fact, Dawn of Justice doesn't count because it's still the only independent Superman movie in the whole DCU. When it comes to superhero movies and stories in general, the Superman figure is a little bit tricky. Despite the fact that Soup embodies everything a great superhero should be, his character has allegedly become stale over the years, according to some observers. This idea originated in part because of Superman's virtually perfect character and excessive powers. Superman's qualities seem unparalleled, yet the defects and flaws of most heroes would be understandable. Despite the accusations levelled at him over the history of comics, one could contain that he is the idolised human being in every way. Imagine for a moment that one day a man like Superman just arrives out of nowhere on Earth. Absolute fear would be the most logical response to such a life-altering occurrence. Or at least it would be the response that the majority of people would have right away. Who's to say that this entity won't one day abruptly reject his purported humanity? Is he to be feared or revered? These issues are central to Zack Snyder's portrayal of Superman, and they add a level of narrative depth with Man of Steel that is uncommon in popular superhero movies. However, this interpretation of Superman as an almost divine creature is entirely consistent with some of the most well-known comic book plots. There's no denying that the original Christopher Reeve portrayal of Superman is one of the most recognisable live-action depictions of a superhero, but few people could ever imagine Reeves' Superman facing off against Doomsday or Darkseid, let alone both, as Henry Cavill's version had to do in the DC universe. When the primary character in a superhero movie is cast, a certain segment of the fanbase nearly always assumes that the movie will fail because the actor or actress doesn't look like the character does in the comics. Yes, that's the norm most of the time, but Henry Cavill may be one of the very few exceptions. When it comes to his portrayal of the eponymous Man of Steel, Cavill might be a little more somber than Reeve, but it matches Clark Kent's character development in the movie pretty wonderfully. The concept is that Clark Kent, whose face and body are nearly identical to the comic book ideal of Superman, but whose viewpoint is very different, is a man who lives in the shadow of an alien presence he can never truly know. This man is not content with his elevated position as a superhuman entity. Instead, he was aware aware from a young age that his abilities were both a blessing and a curse, and he understood that he couldn't use them without inflicting harm on others. The world we know might irrevocably shift for the worse at the moment of reckoning, at which point he would finally be able to reveal himself to the public. When the decision by Snyder and company to choose General Zod, played by Michael Shannon, as the film's principal nemesis was also the right one. The fact that a Kryptonian, or Kryptonians, is a bad guy here, despite the fact that most people associate Lex Luthor as Superman's most dreaded adversary, supports the central thesis of Zack Snyder's Man of Steel. Even someone as powerful as Superman can be corrupted with promise of obtaining even more power. Furthermore, we see how significant Zod's indoctrination is, showing his complex depth in his character. During his New Krypton speech, Zod doesn't try to lie or trick Clark about his intentions. It's because doing so would have implied that he knew what he was doing was wrong. Zod has no intention to lie because he doesn't believe he's doing anything wrong. He does not view Clark as an Earthling, but as a fellow Kryptonian. Any Kryptonian, in his opinion, would be ecstatic about the prospect of reconstructing Krypton in his new world. For Zod, eliminating all humanity from Earth would be akin to a new homeowner, getting rid of all the vermin in a brand new home. Zod would ask himself, why would Cal pick the rats over us? Finally, Man of Steel provided us the rules and aesthetics that would make the DCU a true rival to the MCU. It reinvented Superman for a new generation of moviegoers who wished to witness a side of the Kryptonian that was seldom ever shown before. Consider the thrilling beginning of Krypton, where Russell Crowe's Jor-El battles Zod before being sent to the Phantom Zone. Consider Jonathan Kent's painful scenes with Clark. Consider the tremendous battles of Drew Zod and the villains including Ferrara and Namek undertook towards the end of the movie. Man of Steel is the only other epic superhero movie that has been released. There's no denying that the superhero movies like Snyder's Man of Steel are no longer produced. Whether or not you adore Superman as a character or even think he's too perfect to be appealing, it wasn't necessary for Zack's interpretation of the Superman origin story to reinvent the wheel. It succeeded in delivering an extraordinary timeless Man of Steel story that served to set up the DC universe apart from the Marvel Cinematic Universe in terms of narrative style. I'd love to hear your thoughts below, whether you love Man of Steel as much as I do, or you just see it as yet another comic book movie. Thanks for listening. Please like and subscribe for more British rambles in the future.